Flight attendant accuses. Black man of stealing. Moments later, the airline pays $750,000 in damages. He was pulled from his first-class seat and accused of stealing right in front of the entire cabin. Not because he had done anything wrong, but simply because of the color of his skin. The watch hadn't gone missing. There was no evidence at all. Just a glance from a flight attendant, a whisper between crew members, and then two security officers dragging him off like a criminal. The people around stared, some secretly filming, but no one intervened. They didn't see a passenger. They only saw a threat. What they didn't know was that, this time, they had humiliated the wrong person. This flight wasn't just a journey. It was the moment arrogance faced justice and lost. Jordan Blake boarded Flight 382 with the quiet confidence of someone who has had to work twice as hard to earn half the recognition. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, polished black Oxford shoes, Jordan exuded the air of a successful businessman. The light caught the silver watch on his wrist as he adjusted his cuff, walking past first class and giving a polite nod to a flight attendant near the galley. It was Claire Mitchell, her uniform impeccably neat, posture straight, face cold and expressionless. She observed the passengers as if searching for something unusual, and when her gaze landed on Jordan, it lingered for a moment, long enough for a silent judgment to be formed. No greeting, no smile, just a cold stare. Jordan made his way to seat 2A, stowed his leather briefcase in the overhead compartment, and sat down. He had just opened his tablet when a voice called out, "Excuse me, sir," Claire spoke, her voice calm but tinged with a feigned coldness. "May I see your boarding pass?" Jordan looked up, slightly surprised. "Is there a problem?" "It's just a routine check," she replied, though it was clear it wasn't. Jordan had flown this route many times before, and he had just seen 5 other passengers pass through without being checked. He handed over his ticket, and Claire scanned it, hesitating for a second before nodding stiffly. "You're in the correct seat." "I know," Jordan responded shortly, taking back his ticket. Claire turned away, but her gaze remained as cold as ice. The atmosphere around him suddenly shifted. He could feel it. 5 minutes later, Claire returned, pretending to adjust the curtain dividing the first class and economy sections. But her eyes never left Jordan. Then the chaos began. A woman seated in one seat gasped, "My watch! Where is it?" Her hand trembled as it reached for her bare wrist. Claire immediately rushed over, crouching down. "A watch, ma'am." "Yes, my rose gold Cartier." "I took it off and placed it on the table when I boarded, went to the bathroom, and when I came back, it was gone." "Don't worry," Claire said sweetly. "We'll find it." Her eyes quickly flicked toward Jordan, a reflex almost involuntary. Claire didn't ask anyone else. She went straight to Jordan. "Excuse me, sir, could you please stand for a moment?" Jordan blinked. "Sorry, why?" "We've just received a report about a missing item. It would be better to check the area around you." "Well, go ahead and check," Jordan said, not moving. "But why am I the only one being asked?" "This is not an accusation," Claire hurried to explain. "It's just a precaution." "A precaution for who?" Jordan asked directly, his voice low and firm. "Is it because I'm the only black person in first class?" A few passengers began to look around, hearing the tone of his voice. Claire froze, suddenly realizing that she was attracting attention. She took a step back. "If you don't cooperate, I'll have to call the captain," she warned. "Please do," Jordan responded calmly. "The more public this is, the better." Another flight attendant, Sophie Carter, appeared, her face clearly hesitant. She leaned over and whispered something to Claire. Claire's face darkened. "Fine," she muttered, and then walked away, brushing past Jordan with a look of resentment. But the seed of suspicion had been planted. Whispers began to spread throughout the cabin. The woman in 1C kept glancing at Jordan with suspicion. The man on the other side of the aisle clutched his laptop more tightly. Jordan sat still, his hands folded together, jaw clenched, his eyes cold and fixed ahead. He wasn't surprised. He was just too familiar with this. A third flight attendant, Noah Bennett, quietly approached. He whispered quickly into Claire's ear. Claire nodded, then disappeared behind the curtain. Moments later, she returned, this time not alone. 2 security officers in uniform followed behind, their steps deliberate, their expressions unreadable. The taller one, with short gray hair and a stern face, stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice low but serious. "We've received a report about a missing item. We need you to step off the plane for a quick conversation." Jordan didn't budge, his voice calm, slow. Why isn't the man in 3A being asked to step off? Or anyone else? The security officer shifted slightly, a bit awkward. "We're not accusing you, Mr. Blake. It's just procedure." Jordan smirked. "Funny, it always seems like the procedure only involves me." Then slowly he stood up, every move careful, making sure not to do anything out of the ordinary. All eyes in the cabin were on him now. No one pretended to ignore him. Some even raised their phones, pretending to browse, but really filming secretly. A young woman in 1B even pointed her camera directly at him. She was in her early 20s, wearing headphones, but she clearly aimed the camera straight ahead, recording the scene of Jordan Blake calmly standing, surrounded by flight attendants and security officers. Claire Mitchell's eyes quickly darted toward the girl, her voice suddenly sharp. "Excuse me, I request that you stop filming immediately. It's against airline policy to record security procedures on the plane." The girl didn't even glance back, responding casually. "That's not a real rule. I know my rights." Claire took another step forward, almost lunging. "I have the right to ask you to delete the video for safety reasons." The girl laughed softly. "You don't care about safety. You're just afraid it'll go viral." Jordan glanced at the girl, giving a subtle nod in silent thanks. The tall security officer gestured toward the airplane door. "Mr. Blake, please. We need you to step off. We need to have a quick conversation." Jordan locked eyes with the officer and then slowly bent down to grab his carry-on. He moved with calm composure, showing no signs of haste or fear. A middle-aged man seated nearby muttered loudly enough for him to hear, "If there's nothing wrong, why not cooperate?" Jordan turned slightly, his eyes cold. "I've been cooperating my whole life. The result has never changed." The security officer cleared his throat, looking somewhat uncomfortable. They walked down the aisle together, passing rows of seats filled with staring eyes. The air in the cabin felt thick, suffocating. Claire followed a few steps behind, arms crossed in front of her chest, her lips pressed tightly, a look of smugness hidden beneath her professional mask. At the galley, Jordan was asked to place his bag on the counter. Another officer, a younger man, blond and silent, put on gloves and began to open the bag. Jordan folded his arms, watching every movement like it was a silent trial. The bag was emptied. A neatly folded suit jacket, a laptop, a folder marked confidential, and underneath, a neatly organized stack of personal documents. No watch, no evidence, no reason for the humiliation that had just taken place. After a few awkward minutes, the senior officer sighed. "There's nothing here." "Of course there's nothing," Jordan replied coldly. "There was never anything to find in the first place." He turned to Claire. "Would you like to apologize now, or wait until your manager arrives?" Claire stood frozen, her lips tightly pressed, too stunned to say a word. The officer nodded, speaking hesitantly. "Mr. Blake, you may return to your seat." But Jordan didn't move. He pulled out his phone, quickly accessed his contacts, and spoke in a low voice. "Carl, it's me, Jordan. I need the aviation legal department to activate the tracking for this situation. Flight 382, first class. I want a detailed report of the crew assignment history and passenger interactions from the last 2 hours. Internal, first." He hung up, locked his screen, and coldly fixed his gaze on Claire, before turning and walking back to his seat. The air around him changed. Passengers in the aisle subtly shifted to make room as he passed. The young woman who had been filming earlier subtly nodded at him. The man in 3A, who had earlier shown disdain, now avoided eye contact, lowering his head. Jordan sat down, letting out a deep breath, not out of shame, but out of the rage he had to contain. Claire didn't return. She stood in the galley with another flight attendant, tense, her eyes occasionally darting toward Jordan. The flight had still not taken off. The airplane door remained open. The tension in the cabin was as taut as a stretched wire, ready to snap. A man 2 rows behind Jordan muttered angrily, "Are we taking off, or are we going to keep playing amateurs here?" Immediately, another security officer, his face as cold as ice, walked straight toward Jordan's row. Without acknowledging the flight attendants, he bent down, his voice low. "Mr. Blake, please come with us." "Now." Jordan didn't react immediately. The entire cabin seemed to turn and stare. He asked, his voice soft as steel. "For what reason?" the officer explained, almost apologetically. "We've received an official report of theft. As per protocol, we need to conduct a further check outside the plane." "Who made the accusation?" Jordan asked, his gaze sharp. "Coordination between the crew and the passenger in 1C, the officer replied. At the back, Claire stood with her arms crossed, a victorious look returning to her face. Jordan inhaled deeply, not out of fear, but to suppress the boiling rage within him. "Fine," he said after a few seconds. "Let's turn this into the perfect performance they're hoping for." Jordan stood up, grabbed his carry-on, but the officer raised his hand to stop him. "Please leave your bag. We will check it here to be transparent." "You mean to humiliate me in front of everyone?" Jordan corrected, his voice as cold as ice. The officer didn't respond, only gestured for a young flight attendant to approach. The attendant, a very inexperienced one, slowly walked over, her hands trembling as she unlocked the bag. The zipper opened with a faint squeak. From the bag, the following items fell out: a perfectly folded suit jacket, a laptop, a confidential folder with a stamped seal, and underneath neatly organized personal papers. Some sheets of paper fell from the bag and scattered on the floor. Among them, a brightly colored crayon drawing stood out, a crude sketch of a man holding hands with a little girl. Underneath it, the crooked writing: "Good luck, Daddy. You're the bravest man I know. Love, Daddy's girl, Jada." The drawing rolled near the aisle. The man with the graying hair in 3A, who had earlier mocked Jordan, leaned forward, smirking. "First class, huh?" "More like a third-rate classroom," he muttered loud enough for a few people to hear. The word struck like a slap, not only to Jordan Blake, but to all the passengers silently witnessing. The young woman who had been filming clenched her fists, and the attendant who had opened Jordan's bag stood still, her hands trembling. Jordan bent down slowly to pick up the drawing. He gently dusted off a small smudge that had transferred onto the paper. When he stood up, his expression had changed, not out of anger nor confusion, but with a cold, focused look, as if a switch had flipped in his mind. He looked directly at Claire Mitchell and calmly declared, "This will be the last time I stay silent. You just handed in your resignation. You just don't realize it yet." Claire froze. She blinked once, then again. The security officer beside Jordan cleared his throat, anxious. "We're wasting time, sir." Jordan nodded, then followed them to the plane's exit. As he walked past the rows, the whispers started again. Some faces were filled with sympathy, while others looked on with a morbid sense of curiosity. A man quietly muttered, "That's why we need stricter control." A woman pulled her handbag tightly to her chest, recoiling as Jordan walked by. But not everyone turned away. A man in a wrinkled suit sitting in the fifth row with a press pass on his coat slowly turned on his phone's camera. Not sneakily, not hiding it. He aimed it directly at the scene of Jordan Blake walking out of the cabin and onto the airplane's walkway. Above, the lights flickered like a subtle signal for the turmoil brewing. Inside the cabin, Claire Mitchell stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the empty space where Jordan had just walked out. The young attendant, who had just checked Jordan's bag, slowly approached, gently picking up the crayon drawing and carefully placing it in the front pocket of the briefcase, then zipped it up carefully. The passengers in the cabin shifted uncomfortably, avoiding each other's gazes. For the first time since the flight began, the silence in first class felt heavy and suffocating. The atmosphere was no longer one of casual relaxation. It was tense, fraught with underlying shame. A few rows behind where Jordan had just sat, a man named Evan Cole, wearing glasses and a calm demeanor, leaned forward. Evan wasn't one to confront others, nor was he loud. But he had seen something that no one else dared to address. About 10 minutes before the watch was reported missing, Evan had accidentally seen Haley Brooks, a young flight attendant, hurrying toward the galley. In her hands was a watch, its familiar rose gold gleam shining under the lights. At the time, Evan had simply thought, someone must have left it behind, and the staff picked it up. But when everything turned to target Jordan Blake intentionally, that memory suddenly stung in his mind. Evan glanced toward the galley. Haley Brooks was standing there, facing away from the cabin, her arms tightly gripping her elbows, looking as if she wished she could disappear. Summoning all his courage, Evan stood up, walked toward the galley, and stopped just at the edge of the door. "Excuse me," he said gently, so as not to startle her. Haley turned around quickly, her eyes wide with surprise. Not because she recognized Evan, but because a passenger was daring to approach her like this. "Can I help you?" she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "I'm sorry to bother you," Evan lowered his voice. "But earlier, before everything happened, I saw you holding a watch." The question made Haley's face drain of color immediately. Her professional smile vanished, and her lips trembled, as if she were struggling with herself. Evan softened his tone, patiently. "I don't want to cause trouble. I just want to know the truth." Haley glanced around, making sure Claire wasn't nearby, and then nodded slightly, whispering, "Yes, it's the same watch." "So it's been found?" Evan asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Haley lowered her head. "The watch. It was never lost. The passenger in 1C had left it on the counter in the waiting area. Someone found it and handed it in. Claire knew about it." Evan closed his eyes, his heart heavy. "So why did she still accuse him?" Haley swallowed hard. She said. She felt there was something off about him. She didn't need to specify who he was. Evan repeated softly. "Felt? That's not caution. That's defamation." Haley bit her lip, her eyes glistening with regret. But she didn't speak any further. Haley Brooks' eyes were teary, but she quickly turned away, walking hurriedly toward the back of the galley, avoiding Claire Mitchell. Evan Cole stood there for a moment, reflecting on what he had just heard, before slowly returning to his seat. On the way, he looked up at the internal camera mounted above the second-row lights. Without hesitation, Evan opened his phone, accessed his email, and began drafting. Subject: Passenger Incident Report, Flight 382. He detailed the time, briefly described what he had witnessed, and included the names of Haley Brooks and Claire Mitchell. He wasn't sure if it would make a difference, but at least it was the first right thing anyone on this flight had done on this gloomy morning. Meanwhile, up ahead, Claire was whispering to the woman in 1C, her chin lifted, the arrogance returning to her every move. "Security handled this very professionally," Claire said, her voice indifferent. "Hopefully this will be the last incident." What she didn't know was that everything she said, every word, every expression, every attitude, had been recorded by the internal system, as per the standard protocols for high-class commercial flights. And Jordan Blake knew that very well. Outside the airplane walkway, Jordan stood still with the officer. But in his mind, all the details were clicking into place like a battle map. Claire's gaze, the way she singled him out from the beginning, the escalation that followed, the young woman who had filmed, the attendant who had stood frozen when his daughter's drawing fell to the ground. They had made a fatal mistake. Jordan had always understood the fine line between feeling and accusing. But what Claire and her colleagues didn't realize was he had never walked into a battle without reinforcements behind him. The officer nodded at Jordan, then stepped back. Without a second to waste, Jordan pulled out his phone, unlocked it with his fingerprint, and opened a secure app. The contacts list appeared. He tapped on the line. Anderson Group Legal. Chairman line. He raised the phone to his ear, his voice lowered, but resolute. Blake here. It's time. Flight 382. Activate the civil complaint procedure. Lift all security restrictions. Flag the incident with the Department of Transportation and Internal Legal. I want the full cabin data. Video, audio, crew logs. Extracted immediately after landing. Prepare the lawsuit for discrimination. Name everyone involved. He paused for a beat, then added, send the draft to Sarah. Keep the NDA clause as leverage. Without waiting for confirmation, he hung up, locked his phone, then turned and slowly walked back to his seat. The atmosphere around him had changed. Passengers on both sides of the aisle subtly moved aside as he walked by. The young woman who had filmed earlier gave him a subtle nod. The man in 3A, who had once looked at him with disdain, now avoided his gaze, his head down. Jordan sat back down, exhaling deeply. Not out of shame, but from the anger he had to suppress. Claire did not return. She stood in the galley with another flight attendant, tense, her eyes occasionally darting toward Jordan. The flight had still not taken off. The airplane door remained open. The tension in the cabin was like a taut string, ready to snap. A few minutes later, the voice of the flight captain came through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for takeoff, but due to some unexpected delays, we kindly ask for your patience as we finalize a few matters. The tension in the cabin was almost palpable. It wasn't just the delay. It was something else, something heavy in the air. Jordan Blake sat quietly in his seat, but inside, the wheels were already in motion. He had already made his move. Now, all that was left was to wait. The doors to the cockpit suddenly opened, something that almost never happens. After boarding is complete, Captain Thomas Grayson stepped out, his face showing clear signs of tension, much different from his usual composed self, despite having handled emergency landings before. Following him was a young ground staff member wearing a coat with a badge, panting heavily and whispering something into the captain's ear. The words were too soft for the passengers to hear, but fragments like legal incoming and corporate line floated through the air. Grayson slowly turned and glanced at Jordan, narrowing his eyes. Not with suspicion, but with recognition. The name just mentioned had weight. Captain Grayson straightened up, nodded to the ground staff member, and then walked straight up to Claire Mitchell. Mitchell, please step out here for a moment. Claire blinked repeatedly, her expression stiff. Now, Grayson commanded, his voice firm. He pulled her toward the front of the cabin, speaking softly but distinctly. Nearby passengers pretended not to notice, but everyone subtly leaned forward to listen. Haley Brooks stood frozen, too afraid to even breathe. Claire's face turned pale as she listened to Grayson's words. She tried to open her mouth, but only managed to open it and close it again when Grayson shook his head, signaling for silence. Then he walked straight toward Jordan. The captain cleared his throat. "Mr. Blake," he said in a steady voice, "I've just been informed that your presence on this flight is of particular importance. On behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize for the inconveniences and the disrespect you have endured." Jordan remained seated, not smiling, not showing any emotion. He simply looked up, calmly responding, "I appreciate your apology, Captain, but please remember that words mean nothing without action." Grayson nodded seriously. "I understand. Rest assured we are handling the situation." As the captain returned to the cockpit, murmurs began to rise among the passengers. The woman in 1B leaned toward her husband. "What's going on?" He shrugged, wide-eyed. In the aisle, Haley Brooks sighed with relief for the first time in more than 10 minutes of tension. But the real change was yet to come. The airplane door, which had seemed to be securely closed, suddenly swung open again. The cabin erupted in shocked gasps. A tall man dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, holding a thin leather folder, walked onto the plane. He wore the Skylux Airlines badge on his lapel. His face was pale, his steps heavy but purposeful. He was not a member of the crew. It was Liam Warner, the senior communications director for the airline, someone who only appeared when things had gone horribly wrong. Without looking at anyone, Liam walked straight down the aisle, his eyes quickly scanning the cabin until they landed on Jordan Blake. His eyes widened in surprise, but quickly regained composure. Liam nodded slightly, whispered something to the head flight attendant who was standing frozen. Claire's face, already pale, turned red. Just loud enough for Haley Brooks to hear, Liam muttered, "Don't you know who he is? You just accused a verified strategic shareholder." Haley's breath caught in her throat. She had seen the name flash on the phone screen before it went dark. Anderson Group Legal, an elite law firm that had brought down major corporations with its lawsuits. The words Chairman Line made her turn white. Haley understood immediately. Jordan Blake wasn't just a random passenger. He was a man with real power. Jordan sat quietly, collecting his belongings, among them the crayon drawing that Haley had placed back so carefully. Calmly, he opened his phone again. This time, he accessed the folder labeled CR-19 Flight Protocols, a tracking and internal incident management procedure. He started typing. Time, faces, words. Actions. In the service area, Haley Brooks cautiously approached Claire. "We need to talk," she whispered. Claire raised an eyebrow, looking frustrated. "What now?" "The man," Haley whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "He just called Anderson Group Legal. Do you know what that means?" Claire rolled her eyes, giving a dismissive laugh. "So what? He's just friends with someone. They'll calm down after a free voucher and a drink." But Haley didn't believe that anymore. The weight of what she had been part of, even passively, was now crushing her like a stone. "It's not a threat." Haley shook her head, her voice breaking. "He's not joking. If the legal team gets involved, it won't just be about you." Claire's face twitched slightly, her jaw tightening, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned quickly, grabbing her tablet, trying to maintain a facade of calmness. From afar, Evan Cole was also quietly typing another email. This time, he CC'd the Internal Quality Committee from the law firm where he worked. The man in 3A, who had earlier sneered, sat stiffly, pretending to read the book in front of him. Though he hadn't turned a page in the last few minutes, the atmosphere in first class had changed. This time it wasn't out of sympathy or smugness. It was the silence of unease. Claire Mitchell stood near the galley, gripping her tablet tightly, her eyes darting occasionally toward Jordan Blake but never daring to meet his gaze. Haley Brooks stood a few steps away, biting her lip, her eyes constantly scanning the cabin as if waiting for a bomb to go off. Meanwhile, Jordan sat silently, his arms crossed, his eyes directed out the window. On his lap, his phone screen was dark, but it was still silently recording through a legal app linked to his company's internal security protocols. And then it happened. The cockpit door suddenly opened, an extremely rare occurrence after boarding has completed. Captain Thomas Grayson stepped out, his face showing clear signs of tension, much different from his usual composed self, despite having handled emergency landings before. Captain Grayson walked straight toward Claire Mitchell, who was frozen in place like a statue. "Ms. Mitchell," the captain spoke in a calm but deliberate voice, cutting through the tense air. "According to operational orders, your employment contract with Skylux Airlines is hereby terminated, effective immediately. Please disembark under escort." Claire blinked once, then twice, as if unable to comprehend what she was hearing. Her hand slowly reached up to remove her name tag from her uniform. There was no begging, no defense, just the desperate helplessness of someone witnessing their illusion of power unravel before their eyes. 2 ground staff members entered the cabin with emotionless expressions. Claire lowered her head, picking up whatever shreds of dignity remained, silently walking down the aisle, sandwiched between the 2 staff members. There was no applause, no cheering, only a heavy silence that seemed to collectively acknowledge a form of justice had landed. A few minutes later, a flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, neutral and composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, to ensure complete transparency, Skylux Airlines will be sending every passenger a digital incident report to document your observations regarding the events that just transpired. All information will be forwarded directly to the Oversight Council." In the cabin, phones began to light up. Passengers quietly began drafting their reports. Each person, each sentence, one part of the truth. Across the first-class cabin, passengers quietly nodded, whispering in approval. Some, like Evan Cole, opened their laptops or phones, beginning to type up reports of what they had just witnessed. Others sat quietly, their expressions heavy. They all knew they had just witnessed something worthy of remembrance. Meanwhile, Liam Warner, still standing near the galley, cautiously walked toward Jordan Blake, holding a sealed envelope. His voice was lowered. "Mr. Blake, as per the company's legal and compensation protocols, inside this envelope is the official confirmation of the incident and a compensation offer." He swallowed hard. "The proposed amount is $750,000. Payment will be made in full upon landing." Jordan took the envelope without looking at it and gently placed it on the tray table in front of him. He turned just enough to meet Liam's gaze and said, "Send all of that money to the Freedom to Soar Foundation. Note that it's a direct donation. If you want, keep my name anonymous, but not a single cent should go into my pocket." Liam froze, slightly surprised. "You don't want to keep it for yourself?" Jordan simply shook his head. "I didn't come here to receive money. I came to create change." Liam nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll personally handle it." Behind them, a ripple spread throughout the cabin. A passenger clapped softly, quietly, but with respect. Another whispered, "Now that's true leadership." Even the man who had sneered earlier in 3A now sat silently, hands clenched in his lap, his face red with shame. At the back of the cabin, Haley Brooks cautiously approached, holding a new glass of water in both hands. She gently placed it on Jordan's table, her voice trembling. "Thank you for not staying silent." Jordan simply nodded slightly, not out of pride, but because of principle. He didn't do this for applause. He did it for those who would come after him, other passengers who deserved to be treated with dignity. On the intercom, the captain's voice sounded, "The aircraft will begin taxiing, preparing for takeoff." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted once more. It no longer felt heavy as it did before. Now it was a lightness, a calmness, as if everything had just been cleansed. This flight was no longer just about traveling from point A to point B. It had reached a far more significant destination. 3 weeks after Flight 382 landed, the incident exploded across the globe. The internal footage, originally meant for internal purposes, had leaked and quickly went viral across all platforms. The news, analysis reports, debates, social campaigns. Just 10 minutes of prejudice and its aftermath was enough to ignite public opinion. Claire Mitchell's name appeared frequently in headlines attached to the title, "Flight Attendant Fired After Racism Scandal." Her face, frozen in the security camera footage, became a symbol of warning for the entire industry. Her career opportunities vanished overnight. Former colleagues turned their backs on her. Her personal email was flooded with anonymous hate messages. Yet, throughout the entire storm, the only person she had deeply insulted, Jordan Blake, never spoke ill of her again. He didn't give interviews. He didn't seek out the cameras. He didn't make any public statements except for the official one. Instead, Jordan sent a handwritten letter, not titled, not signed, just a few simple lines, to Claire's temporary address. In the letter, he wrote, "You judge me wrong, but I won't judge you the same way. Consequences are necessary, but cruelty is not justice. If you are willing to learn and change, there is a program I fund for people who want to recover from biased behavior. It's not easy, it's not gentle, but it leads to something better. You are invited to join. The choice is yours. No expectations, no pressure, just an open door after a fall." Claire Mitchell sat quietly for hours with that letter in her hands. At first, she was filled with anger. Then she was scared. Eventually, she realized this was an opportunity and everyone gets. 3 days later, she applied to join the program. The following months were not easy. Claire had to attend workshops, engage in role reversals, and face her own biases head-on. She cried during peer evaluations. There were times she almost gave up, but then she returned. And slowly, she stopped making excuses and began to truly listen. Meanwhile, Skylux Airlines underwent an unprecedented overhaul. Jordan Blake's report became the foundation for the creation of a new corporate fairness department. Inspired by what she had witnessed, Haley Brooks requested a transfer and was accepted into that very department, becoming a training and inclusivity supervisor. The new training program was rolled out nationwide. Policies were rewritten. The anonymous feedback system was connected directly to independent oversight councils. Jordan didn't need to hold any title to lead the change. He had already engraved it into the foundation long ago. A year later, at a modest conference center in Chicago, the Global Conference on Equity in Aviation drew a large crowd of leaders, employees, activists, and skeptics. Haley Brooks stood near the stage, her hands trembling slightly as she reviewed her short speech. Her name tag read, "Haley Brooks, Equity Supervisor, Skylux." The final speaker was introduced. No fanfare, no PR. Just one short sentence. Today's final speaker brings a story of consequences, redemption, and growth. Please welcome Claire Mitchell. The cabin fell into a deathly silence. Everyone, from the sharply dressed business leaders to the young girl holding her hands tightly together, fixed their eyes on the man standing in the middle of the first-class cabin. Jordan Blake didn't need to raise his voice. With a single sentence, he had made the entire airplane feel like it had stopped breathing. What you just saw, it's not an isolated incident. It's a disease that's taken root, and today it ends. No one moved. No one dared to take a deep breath. At that moment, someone who had been looked down upon, who had been stereotyped solely for the color of his skin, had turned the entire game around, not with anger, but with the truth. And what happened next changed not only that flight, but the way an entire industry would face justice and humanity. If today's story has touched your heart, if you believe that every small action can create a better world, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to help us spread more stories like this one. Now let's begin the journey. Not every injustice is revealed. Not everyone gets a chance to turn the tables. But whenever someone dares to stand up with calmness, with belief in what's right, a change will happen. Forever. Jordan Blake didn't seek revenge. He sought change. And with patience, intelligence, and kindness, he turned a moment of humiliation into a milestone for justice and hope, not just for himself, but for all those who have ever been wronged without a voice. Because true justice doesn't only come from punishment, it also comes from the opportunity to heal and change.